This conference will now be recorded.
Well, good afternoon. This is JoAnn Forrester, also known as the Empress of Biz, with Sal Acosta, who I have affectionately called the Duke of Biz. And our special guest is Salene Mazur Kraemer, an attorney who specializes in bankruptcy. When Sal and I put together our topics, one of the things that people tend to shy away from is bankruptcy. But to us, knowledge is forewarned, and when you're forewarned, you can prevent a lot of different things. And Salene, we're very pleased to have her. She's board certified as a business bankruptcy lawyer by the American Board of Certification. In 2014, she was a rising star by Super Lawyers magazine for West Virginia business and bankruptcy. And in 2019, she was a super lawyer list for Pennsylvania business bankruptcy law. So we have someone who has been in the field for quite a while and can share her knowledge. One thing I wanted to start with is that bankruptcy is nothing new. It is something that in 2010, 1.6 million people went through, and that included some major businesses. Bankruptcies are in half right now, so roughly 750,000 people went through bankruptcy last year, and they're still declining. But that means a lot of people have been in pain. A lot of people's field of dreams have been broken. And one of the reasons we wanted to talk about this was to prepare you to talk about it, to be honest with yourself and your family and your investors. When do we pull the plug? Or what can we do so that we don't pull the plug? So good afternoon and welcome, Salene and Sal. And Salene, you've been in bankruptcy law for almost 20 years?
Yes.
Yeah. What interested you about this?
Well, I had gotten an MBA before law school, and so I had that business background going into law school, and I was actually doing corporate and securities work, M&A work in Philadelphia when the dot-com bubble burst in 2000, and then 9/11 happened, and we threw us into a recession. So the corporate work dried up, and the bankruptcy work started to boom. And at the time, I was with a big firm, and they had an active bankruptcy practice in Wilmington, Delaware, and they asked me to switch my practice focus at that time, which I did, and it's been quite a ride. It's a fascinating area of the law, which definitely has an element of public service to it. On the debtor side, you feel like you're helping people, and at a time when they're facing a dire situation, personally and professionally. So,
Salene, could you, and I know this is a very, very technical and very, very complicated process, but within about 60 seconds, could you describe just the real basics of the bankruptcy process, maybe the differences between Chapter 7, Chapter 11, and other alternatives, and maybe very briefly again, the difference in rights between secured and unsecured creditors so that people kind of just get the bare minimum, bare bones understanding of a bankruptcy process and also what triggers it.
Yeah, sure. So with Chapter 11, and I'm assuming that my client base is a small business. When someone who's a small business comes to me, we explore all out of bankruptcy options because bankruptcy can be a very expensive endeavor and very stressful and taxing on all parties involved. So we try to do forbearance agreements with creditors and try to buy time and work things out that way. But if that fails for a small business, the options really are a Chapter 11. Generally, that's the one where you file the petition and it's an automatic stay of people coming after you and gives you a fresh start and breathing room to try to reorganize and develop a plan of reorganization and strategy. You could also do a Chapter 7 for a business. A Chapter 7 is basically a public funeral notice that the business is no longer in operations, and Chapter 7 trustee is appointed, and the debtor is basically, the business owner is ousted from control over the liquidation, and that Chapter 7 trustee liquidates and puts the business to rest. I don't typically do those. it doesn't really make sense, because you could just do that yourself and dissolve a company and let creditors know that there's no money to be had. It's often where there are assets to be had upon liquidation, and people are still fighting over who's going to get those proceeds. There are also, Chapter 12 is for family farmers. Chapter 15 is when there's a foreign entity involved. But by and large, it's usually a small business will consider a Chapter 11 proceeding. So that's the answer to that question. The second question you asked is regarding whether a creditor is secured or unsecured, which is a crucial question for someone that, and I do represent creditors. The majority of my practice is about 70% debtor, but about maybe 30% creditor, where someone is owed money, and how do you protect yourself in that waterfall scheme of, say there's $1 million after the business liquidates to be distributed to creditors, and you have to protect your interest to make sure that you're as high up in that hierarchy or priority of creditors, which is articulated in the bankruptcy code, who should get paid first. So a secured creditor just means that they have a creditor has protected the debt that they are owed by filing a security interest in an asset of the business. Typically, you'll file a UCC1 or a blanket security interest on all of the business's assets, so that if that customer, if that client goes under, then let's say a bank, then they're going to get paid first once that equipment, furniture, fixtures, accounts receivable, checking accounts, once all of those are liquidated, then they're first. Generally, there are other creditors that can jump ahead, taxing bodies, administrative creditors in a bankruptcy case. Those are paid first, unless the secured creditor, it's complicated. It's not a simple answer. A secured creditor, if say they have assets in a particular asset, they will collect first on that distribution before like an attorney's fees on that. So yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to ask, because well, you're on the legal side, and I know you try to work for turnaround. I'm usually on the side of trying to prevent it and get sufficient money so that my client can work through it. One of the things that I have found that creates bankruptcy conditions is rapid growth. A company is bringing in a lot of money, but a lot of money is going out. Have you found that as one of the reasons that companies get into trouble?
Sure. We see that a lot with startup companies that have, not a company that's been around for 40 years, but they started to sort of hit the pavement, and they come into a lot of revenue, and they're not sure how best to spend their earnings. And yeah, I don't see that as often, quite frankly. Usually when someone comes to me, that's not why they're in trouble.
Why are
Actually,
they
let
in
me ask you
trouble?
this.
What's your
From what you have seen in your practice and your experience, what would you say is the most common reason people get into trouble and maybe end up filing for bankruptcy? And also proactively, what things could they be doing or looking at now to prevent that most common reason of getting into trouble and filing for bankruptcy? What can they do proactively to prevent that?
I think if small business owners take something away from this conversation is, once you're starting to feel the hallmarks or some symptoms of trouble, which JoAnn laid out in her checklist. I thought your checklist was excellent about, oh no, I haven't paid myself in a year. Is my company distressed? Technically, yes. If you're not able to pay yourself, if you're not able to pay your taxes, if you're not able to make payroll, there's a laundry list of things that, and I've run my own business too. I mean, I've experienced a lot of these things myself, my own law practice for 10 years on my own. Basically, to get advice on how to strategize around the problem and what to do if you lose that customer, what to do. A lot of times I've seen so by the time they get to me, the things that they come to me, it's usually too late. The business owner's already depleted their 529, their 401ks. They'll throw everything into the business, to the dismay of the spouse, because the spouse may not know, or it might be assets that are jointly held by the husband and wife, and they're doing anything to save the pride, to save the public embarrassment, to save the business. And I really try to tell my clients that this inherent in business, there's risk, and you shouldn't be ashamed of it. It's not like you're out frivolously spending. Sometimes that happens too, but where you invest in an endeavor, and sometimes things outside of your control don't pan out. But it takes them a while. They have to get to the psychological point. Usually there's points of pain that they can't get around. Like, for example, taxes. They've had bank accounts seized. They have judgments being filed against them. A creditor has a judgment, and now they're executing on the judgment. They're trying to seize accounts receivable. They're trying to lock doors. Maybe you owe the landlord, you defaulted in paying rent. The landlord's finally sick of it, and they lock you out of the space. Those are the reasons when someone actually gives me the retainer to file the case, because once you file a bankruptcy proceeding, it puts a stop on almost every adverse action that could be taken against you, and gives you that breathing room. So, yeah.
Will you renegotiate with the bank and help people reduce? Because some of the terms are not always so friendly. Will you do that?
Yeah. So when I was opening, I was saying, and we try to exhaust every opportunity to avoid bankruptcy. One of that is actively negotiating with the creditors in the case. Usually it's a bank, and because the bank has an interest in the business continuing so that they can get the highest return on their dollar. So like, say if they file bankruptcy, the percentage distribution on their dollar may be 5 cents or 10 cents on the dollar. So I try to convince lenders to stick it in there with us, depending upon the story of the client. If they have a business there that's to save and that can be saved, they have the right people involved. You try to make the best story. I feel like what I do a lot is just storytelling, and I'm a storyteller. I'm a writer. I take photographs. In these things, I'm telling a story. And same thing as a lawyer, when I'm writing a pleading or writing a letter to a bank to tell the story of the business, so that they believe in what we're saying and will give us the time. So.
Yeah, and I've been known to take them and feed them and take whatever whatever that takes. I've taken them to the hospital. Whatever needs to be done, I've done it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So you often get people who are in transitions. They have been through corporations, and I think we should do a whole show on this. But you know, one of the things that we have found, you and I in our conversation, is people decide to buy a business too late.
Yeah, I'm a big believer, and I know we've talked about this in the past, that having had a role in a big corporation helps you to then become an entrepreneur. But the flip side is sometimes the entrepreneur has to wear every single hat. Okay. And the reality is you can't pay for absolutely every support service you need to run your company, because all those people obviously need to make a profit. And at some point, you don't make a profit. So you have to be very sort of judicious, very careful as to what you do in-house to the best of your abilities and what you can subcontract out. The other thing that I found in my experience you have to be a little careful with is sometimes people will have a very deep expertise in the technical aspects of their field, but they're not really well-rounded enough to really run a business and wear all the hats. So, for example, they may be a great cook, they may be a great photographer, they may be a great X, but that doesn't mean that they can run a restaurant, or that doesn't mean they can run a portrait studio, or whatever the case may be. And that's where they get into trouble. And then they get into the vicious loop of, maybe what we were talking about earlier, denial and procrastination. So, the bills come in, they ignore them. They don't even put them into the accounting system. They stick their head in the sand thinking, oh, this payday will come around and then I'll be able to make everybody whole and pay my taxes and pay everything, and everything will get back on track. And unfortunately, sometimes that payday never comes around and they just get deeper and deeper into trouble. Till then, it's almost impossible to pay anybody to help you.
Yeah. Salene, when you work with clients, I know you would prefer to work with them before they're in disaster.
Yeah.
What would you like them to think of if they come and sit down with you and say, we're thinking of going into business and we don't plan to go into bankruptcy, but what should we be looking at? What is our spot that we should be frankly terrified of?
So assuming that they're starting a business, or they're buying an active business, a going concern business?
They're buying an active business.
Oh, if they're buying one?
Yeah.
Well, so I did write this article. I'd like to pull it up. If there, I put together this 12-point checklist, and it's really for the going concern business. It was when I was with the firm at the time, and the theme for the magazine was change, and I wanted to write about how to adapt to change, particularly in light of the retail apocalypse and the circles I run in. That's what they were calling all of the retail bankruptcies that happened last year. And I studied this. I studied and did research on the retailers that had filed, and what could they do? How could they have changed their business model to prevent a Chapter 11 bankruptcy or a Chapter 7 liquidation? And I think that a lot of things you cannot control, but I think and external factors, but certain things you can certainly always be on top of, and that's looking at what your competitors, staying competitive with your product, with your pricing, being on top of technological advances that could make your product or service obsolete. Those kind of things come out of nowhere, and they shouldn't, and you should, be on top of that. A lot of times in my business, and there are things that I see, they're catastrophic events for the business owners, particularly for small business. For management, someone gets sick, someone has a brain problem now, they get into a car accident, and they're key employees, and the business just reels from that. So there should be plan Bs in the event that something like that happens. A lot of times you see embezzlement and fraud, and not having the checks and balances. I mean, and I'm actually writing an article right now. It's for the American Bar Association about the dark side of business bankruptcy, both from a practitioner's perspective, but also from a business owner's perspective, to see and to understand why it can be a very stressful practice of law, quite frankly. You see a lot of things you don't want to see, and people at their worst, and people, personally and professionally just, falling apart. But yeah.
You probably don't do divorce law. I've had.
Well, let me throw out one thing too, because I've seen this, and I've experienced it personally, by the way. A lot of times, as a small business owner, every problem can be fixed by higher prices, but or almost every problem can be fixed by higher prices, which is higher revenues, higher sales. But of course, you're still subject to market conditions, and you can't price yourself out of the market. But having said that, prices, I think, should also be dynamic, in the sense that, sometimes subcontractors or just any small business, when they have idle capacity, they may want to lower the prices to fill up that capacity and absorb that overhead. Like conversely, when they're running at capacity or close to capacity, they may be able to cherry pick their jobs a little bit more and then demand higher prices. And they say, okay, if I get the job, it's nice because it's at a high price. But if I don't, it's okay because I'm running at capacity or close to capacity. Problem is, I think sometimes people kind of lose their situational awareness, for lack of a better term, and end up underpricing everything. I remember, and I'll speak for myself, back in 2007, 2008, when the wheels were falling off the truck, we were pricing everything, all the new stuff, at marginal cost. I mean, not even cost, not even fully absorbed cost, literally cost, labor and materials. And my engineering manager, who was a very sharp guy, didn't have a background in business or accounting. He says, Sal, well, this is all great because we're trying to keep the business here and the people inside the building working. Well, somebody's got to pay for the overhead, which is our salary. And I said, yeah, you're absolutely right. We're lucky that we had some old business that was still under the old prices, and that's what I'm counting on to cover the overhead. And this is just more to keep us running at capacity. But I think small business owners fall into that loop and they can never raise prices, and then eventually nobody pays for overhead and profit, and then they can't reinvest and get into trouble that way.
Right.
When you work with people and you've worked with major corporations and you work with small business, as I have, what's the difference in how people respond to bankruptcy? Is there a difference?
Between small business and big business?
Yeah.
The emotional toll on the small business side, because you see the personal guarantees. Often with the small business loans, the banks require any owner that owns 20% or more to personally guarantee the debt. So, and also with trust fund taxes like sales taxes, excise taxes that are trust fund taxes, and payroll taxes. Once a business is distressed, on the small business side, you see business owners not paying that employer share of their payroll taxes, because it's complicated, but ultimately those kind of taxes, the trust fund taxes, the person flows to the business owner, and anyone that, it could even be the accountant or the bookkeeper. I think that you see, I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah, so the personal hit on the small business owner is not only financially, it's emotionally, because they have so much more online.
Right. It's and then, with a bigger company, it's a board of directors. It's not that emotional toll. And unfortunately, and it's stressful for me as a practitioner. I mean, you've got people, it just causes a tremendous amount of stress. And there was a panel at one of the national conferences I was at, and it was a Florida practitioner talking about the rate of suicide of business owners that face. I mean, it's serious matters. I sympathize, and it's something. It's a field that I've gotten myself. It's like being a heart surgeon. It's very stressful, but it's also very rewarding. So
and by the way, Salene, just so you know, because one time I was involved with this, and again, things to maybe avoid, people that are watching this video, but this was a gentleman that hired me as a business broker to try to help sell his business before it completely went under. Unfortunately, couldn't get it done. I couldn't get it done. It was too late. But I remembered, because it was exactly what you said. He had provided some personal guarantees, which included his house, which was a very nice house. And the part that was very painful from a sort of interpersonal perspective is, throughout this whole process, he had never told his wife, hey, the business is in trouble. I'm trying to sell it, but maybe if I can't sell it, we might have to file for bankruptcy. And by the way, one of the assets that is securing all these loans is our house. So I can only imagine what that conversation was like when it finally had to happen, and there was no more choice but to have that conversation with his spouse.
Right. I think that's very important. I'm sorry, Joanna. It's very important to have, like, when you're saying someone's going to buy a business, or to have the conversation about how to protect your assets, your spouse's assets, because there are things that you can do to make sure that, to keep the business as separate as you possibly can from your personal assets. Another comment I wanted to make is having a board of advisors. I actually wrote a blog post on this, not necessarily a formal corporate board, because a lot of these small businesses, like with my law firm, I'm not going to have a board of directors, but to have a board of advisors, people from diverse areas of business that will keep you in check, at least like voluntarily, maybe unpaid people, but people that want to help you, that can mentor you. I think mentorship in small business is really important. So you can ride on the coattails of other people who have faced that same problem. So you can get quicker to where you want to go with your business, and they can warn you about things that you should and shouldn't do. I think a lot of people, and I myself, I mean, I was hesitant to ask other law firm owners about what do I do here, what do I do there, and I think it's very important. And I think that hopefully small business owners that are listening to this will consider doing something like that. At least 3 people that you can say, hey, shoot around an email. I'm about to do this. What do you think? That kind of thing.
Yeah, and you need people who are willing to be very blunt with you and not tell you what you want to hear. And I see that sometimes in family-owned businesses, everybody just agrees so that they go along. And then when the disaster hits, everybody's saying, well, I knew that was going to go wrong. In one of my lives, I was a counselor, and some of the situations that we got called into in family-owned businesses, when you talked about embezzlement, that's an issue that if people aren't paying family members reasonable rates, that often creates a situation where products just going out the back door, where all kinds of things are being done, husbands with wives, wives with husbands, family members. That really creates a disaster for the business.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think family businesses present really unique issues. Very.
And by the way, the opposite is true too, also, because I've seen it. Sometimes you'll have a spouse that gets a very nice salary, maybe an above market salary, but doesn't really contribute to the business, doesn't put in the hours, doesn't work. And that's a problem, because if you ever file for bankruptcy or sell the business or close the business, whatever, all of that is going to go away, and maybe they're relying on that for a certain lifestyle, and then all of that is going to go away. Not to mention the fact that when you want to sell the business, let's assume we go the positive direction, and we want to sell the business. It just makes the job that much harder, because you have to explain to the potential buyer, hey, listen, you got to add back all this money that we're paying out in this salary, that you're not going to have to do. And then you convince them and have them trust you that yeah, it is true, these expenses can go away.
Yeah.
A lot of times people think that, you mentioned it before, trust issues, that somehow bankruptcy takes away that. But that never really bankruptcy does not take away what you owe the government. Am I correct?
Oh, trust fund. Yeah. Well, no, that's with respect to specific types of tax that are sales tax, payroll taxes, excise taxes. Those don't go away. You could possibly negotiate penalties and interest depending upon if the taxing body is secured or not. Income taxes in an individual case, even with a business, the last 3 years are not dischargeable, but if they're stale outside that 3-year period, then those could be dischargeable. But if the taxing body is secured, then that's a different situation. It's a complicated analysis, but it is certainly one of the benefits of filing a case, because then you're able to get a quick resolution, hopefully, with the IRS. You have to have the taxing bodies on board with any Chapter 11 and figure out a way to work with them and pay them back. And
what about union dues? Non-union contractors are often take on a job where they have to absorb union dues. Sometimes they haven't correctly assessed their pricing. I've dealt with that a lot. Is that something, when you negotiate bankruptcy, that can be negotiated away, or that's one of those trust issues that just don't go away?
Are you talking about you said union dues?
Well, what I'm talking about is the union scale, where you have to all of a sudden pay union wages, prevailing wages.
Oh, okay.
Okay, but then you you get late in your payments because you don't have the money. The contractor doesn't have the money, or he hasn't accurately figured out what that extra bump in union job's going to cost him. So you end up owing the union literally thousands of dollars. And their penalties are pretty high. They can be up to 50%.
I've never had that kind of situation. I know that, wages are priority claim in a bankruptcy case. And if there's specific, it's called the WARN Act, specific kind of notice you have to give to employees of the bankruptcy case. With respect to unions particularly, there are specific provisions of the bankruptcy code that address collective bargaining agreements. It's a real niche area of bankruptcy practice. I personally have never dealt with it in the last 10 years. I know that in some of the Chapter 11s that I worked on that were big Chapter 11s, big public company chapter in Philadelphia and Wilmington, Delaware, there were always unpaid pension, unfunded pension liabilities, and how to deal with that. But it's a very technical issue and an issue often in these cases.
Yeah. Salene, let me ask you this, because it's no secret that the last years have been really good from an economic perspective. Things have been humming along, but of course, trees don't grow to the sky. For the last couple of years now, people have been starting to get worried about, recession, maybe not depression, but a recession, whatever. And still, people are saying, okay, it's not going to be 2020, maybe it'll be 2021, who knows, 2022. But how worried are you about that? And more specifically, how worried are you about that in the context of small businesses that may not be able to survive through that recessionary period and then come back out the other side?
Yeah. So it's interesting you asked me that, because in the spring I'm the materials handler for a panel with the ABA in Boston on an upcoming recession. And what does that mean? We're just developing the program materials now. Is it coming? How is it going to impact business, and how to respond to it and protect yourself? I think that what we talked about before, about someone always being on top of the financial aspect and financial condition of the business, however small, someone looking at the books, looking at the revenue that's coming in, the expenses that are going out, the profit that you have on a particular product or service, and staying on top of that. They say in the turnaround management circles that, cash is king, and understanding how much cash you have coming in and where it's actually going. So that you can be more informed about change that might be coming. If you're going to lose a particular customer, or is your supplier going to be more expensive, or so you can be on top of those kind of things.
Okay. I watch things like how many neighborhood restaurants are closing. And in my neighborhood, which is a nice middle-class neighborhood, we have had 5 close within the last 6 months, and that has got me worried.
Yeah.
And there's, and I like the food, I there was no reason for them to close quality-wise, but I'm watching that. And I also have someone who's in a car dealership and sells trucks. And I ask her what her sales are like every month, and they are starting to go down. So those are the things I watch. And I've been right. I hate to tell you, Sal, but I've been right every time.
Let me just throw out one, that because a lot of small business owners do what in behavioral economics is called mental accounting, which is, just sort of have some guidelines in your head. But one guideline I'd like to throw out there that I use for myself, and that I think every business owner should use if you're going to do this mental accounting, is make sure every month the balance on your bank account grows a little bit. It doesn't have to be a lot. I mean, it could be $10, $100, $1,000, whatever, because the converse should start to set off alarm. If your bank account month to month the balance goes down, even by $10, even by $100, even again $1,000 for a little bit of a bigger business. That's where you have to start really worrying, especially and it's also in the context of assuming that, again, you've paid yourself, you've paid your employees, you've done all the right things, right? You're not cutting any corners to make it artificially go up. But assuming you haven't cut any corners, if that bank account balance doesn't go up at least a little bit every month, that should start to set off the alarm bells and set off the analysis and set off talking to people like Salene and other advisors and start to worry. We're getting very close actually to 2:30, which I know we needed to stop. So Jan, do you want to do like just maybe a final wrap up before we all finish this?
What I'd like to do, first of all, Salene, what is the best way to contact you?
Yeah, you can call me or text me at any time, 7 days a week. Often, I know with this kind of stress, people want to talk to someone right away. Sensitive to that, it's 412-427-7075. You can email me, Salene, Salene, at Mazur, Mazur, Kraemer, Kraemer.com.
Yeah, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Same thing. You can call me anytime because this is my passion. So I don't mind if you call on Saturday or Sunday. Area code 484-358-9470. 484-358-9470. You can email me at sal459 at yahoo.com. sal459 at yahoo.com.
And you can get a hold of me, JoAnn Forrester, the Empress of Biz, at 412-440-6969. And the email is empressofbiz@gmail.com. We also have a Facebook page, and we are always putting some tips on. And please put some links onto your articles. I've been looking at your Vita there, and quite impressive, all the articles. We have to talk. I love writing too. Thank you very much. As far as I would love to have you back on again. I'm hoping that you're available. We can talk some more warning signs and what people can do when the sales tax person is after them. They're meaner than the IRS. So again, this session was based on when you go into business, you have dreams. And we don't want your dreams turning into a nightmare. And what you can do to protect yourself and think through so that when things do turn upside down, and they will, and I've been through it myself, how you can get out of it, how you can preserve your dignity, how you can preserve your finances. This is JoAnn Forrester, the Empress of Biz, along with Sal Acosta, the Duke of Business, and super lawyer Salene. And we are delighted that everyone gave their time. Thank you, and have a good and prosperous week.
You too.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Salene.